and welcome to the book Crushing Crisis Book Club. We're doing Infinity by Jonathan Hickman today, and I'm here halfway across the world with my friend Peter. How are you?
I am doing well. I'm so excited to talk about this book. We barely could contain ourselves last week from talking. This is what happens when we read a little bit ahead. We're these irrepressible spoilers. We just want to talk about all the future stuff. So here's our chance to get really excited about Infinity.
Right, and it was kind of difficult for me because, I'm a pretty much of scatterbrain. So the thing is, I wasn't sure where Avengers and New Avengers for our last week assignment ended and where Infinity began. So I had to kind of keep reminding myself, oh, no, that happened in Infinity. Stop talking about it. So yeah, now it's like no holds bar. And, obviously I didn't read anything further than Infinity. So
no more spoilers. This is
no more spoilers. Yeah, I'm kind of notorious about that. But, you told me that you should stop doing that. I'm like, okay, I'm just not going to read because from what I hear, apparently it gets better. I'm like, if I read, I would have just talked about that. So, yes.
So before we get into the meat of Infinity, this book does include some Avengers issues that are somewhat of a prelude to Infinity, although it's hard to completely appreciate how they connect to it at first, which is that the Avengers are... things are happening at these different sites that these origin bombs have hit that Ex Nihilo has launched from Mars, although now they're on good terms with him. And it seems like they're trying to establish contact. And so the Avengers are trying to fight against the origin sites. The origin sites are fighting back. AIM has now gotten involved. And it's a really good kind of blowout, knockdown, drag out kind of Avengers fight because they get the tar beaten out of them at this one site in Perth.
Right. And the thing is that this is kind of where, if you think, even though they're in Avengers, everything that we read, there was some actions, but it kind of had some quiet moments to it. With starting here, there is no more quietness. There's just action, and everything is just coming at you at all time. And sometimes I was actually kind of worried. I'm like, oh my God, this is it? This somehow they've met their match.
And what's interesting to me is I almost forgot about that because Infinity is so big that even though it feels like such a huge challenge for the Avengers at the beginning of this book, it quickly recedes in the rearview mirror as Infinity begins to escalate. And it's like, that was nothing.
Right. And that's the kind of the idea, because I was kind of thinking, I'm like, okay, so they talked about this white event for a very long time, or what's that going to happen? But then when the Infinity began, you're like, oh shoot, that was nothing. This is it. This is where it's going to things are going to kickstart. And then obviously our big baddie Thanos shows up with his quest to do whatever crazy things that he woke up with. And the thing is it's just, and then at the same time, the New Avengers, there's all this the incursion is already it's still on everyone's mind, and Namor and T'Challa is going at each other's throat. So there's a lot of things that's going on.
Yeah, and I think the first time I read this, I was confused. I don't think I felt confused at the time, but now rereading it this time, I'm like, I don't know if I completely understood how to separate all of these different parts. So let's unpack these Russian dolls. Let's start from the thing we know and get to the things that are new. So there's the incursions. We've already got the incursions. We're familiar with them. And the New Avengers team, the Illuminati, have been making these bombs that could potentially detonate another Earth. And they're hyper focused on this to the point that they're not really participating in the Avengers or in their other teams or their other lives. And then these big things start happening and they have to kind of tear themselves away from this, knowing that an incursion could happen at any moment. And the incursion will end Earth faster than Thanos or faster than the Builders, because from the 8 hours that it begins, at the end of the 8 hours, Earth is done for if nothing is done. So that's at the core of the problem. Then there's Thanos. So what ultimately do we learn is Thanos' reason for this particular mission back to Earth?
He wants to kill his last surviving child, because apparently that's the thing he does, which I did not know.
Yeah, apparently he's just been a big man whore across the universe. and and then he goes and bats cleanup, killing all these kids. It's a similar story that we saw play out for Wolverine prior to Marvel now, although he didn't mean to kill his kids, and but he did anyway. Spoilers. And so now we have Thanos, and there's one left. And it's somewhere on Earth, and he's sure that it's there. And he's like, I hate Earth anyway, so there's fridge benefits to this adventure, which is that I get to beat up on all the heroes I don't like on Earth. Then there's...
No, but also don't forget, like, that child may or may not be an Inhuman.
Right.
So that's
knows
how kind
that he's left with an Inhuman.
Right.
But he doesn't know what happened after that, necessarily.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
And so he's particularly gunning for Black Bolt because he knows that Black Bolt is on Earth. So, and they've already come to blows. If you've read Annihilation and Annihilation Conquest into War of Kings, Thanos and Black Bolt have some recent history and they are not fans of each other. So then there's the even bigger story, which summons the majority of the Avengers team into space before they realize that Thanos is bearing down on Earth, which is that there's this builder fleet, and they are pretty much on a vector straight towards Earth. And they're willing to destroy anything that gets in their way because, as we find out later in the story, they're not very fast. They pretty much can only travel in this one direction. And so it's much more efficient for them to just destroy planets than to go around solar systems. And the distress call gets to Earth that these systems are being crushed. But ultimately, if they're not stopped, Earth is going to be the finish line for their march through the universe.
Right. And the thing is, I'm glad that you explained that why they're going in a straight line, because I didn't get that. Because I'm like, why are they going through this way? Why can't they just kind of go around and get to Earth if Earth is the final mission? But the thing is, I wasn't quite clear that why they decided to destroy Earth. Like, why was Earth the final
well, let's
frontier?
unpack this, because this is not only key to understanding Infinity, but key to, I think, appreciating the rest of Hickman's run. So the Builders are the originator of the Alephs and Ex Nihilo and Abyss, who we saw on Mars in the beginning of the last arc. And the Builders are kind of this caretaking race that built everything, and they want to make sure the universe kind of exists and continues. But they are aware of the incursions problem, and their solutions for the incursions problem is that in every universe, the Builders in that universe want to destroy all the Earths, because if all the Earths are destroyed, they can't collide, and the universes can't be at risk, and time will remain as elongated as it could be. But the thing is, there's not universal versions of the Builders. There's just Builders. And they, and even though there's different factions of them in different universes, they move through this sub-universal space called, I think, the Superflow, where that allows them to kind of pop out wherever they want to. But we saw early in this that there was a problem, and all of their stations in the Superflow get blown up. And so now the big faction of them, which are in our universe, is really far away, and they're not built for speed. They're built for going through the Superflow, so they can't get to Earth as fast as they want to. If they had the Superflow, they would just pop out, blow out Earth, pop back into the Superflow, and go to another universe's Earth. So they're stuck in our universe, and they're stuck in their physical space with, like, kind of not sub-light vessels, because they're clearly going at the speed of light at points, but they're not like wormhole jumping crazy space vessels. They're just like normal space vessels like any other race in Marvel might have.
Right. Okay. Thank you for clarifying.
But you know what? I didn't even understand. And Black Swan at the very end, when she's kind of like, this is only the beginning, is kind of like, do you realize the reason why you had so much time to deal with this problem? It's because the Builders aren't even at their full capacity. What happens when the map makers get here? And I missed that the first time I read it because I didn't understand how significant it was. And this time when I read it, I was like, right, that's why this all happened. So it was really important and really easy to miss.
Right. And the thing is, like, I was kind of like more got into the like nitty gritty, like, because there's like so many different characters got introduced. So I was kind of more focusing on that to kind of figure out that, oh, okay, there's all these other things going on, or the fact that, you know, what I understood that pretty much the Builders are like kind of like the anti-Illuminati. Like Illuminati, they're trying to figure out like destroying other worlds in order to save the universe, and then by Earth themselves. But Builders are on the other hand, they're like, let's just go and destroy all the Earth so the universe will survive.
Right.
So
it's kind of like, it exposes, for me, the pretentiousness of these Earth heroes. Like, there's a point in Infinity where the Builders cause a whole world, a huge world, to be diseased. And they have to evacuate hundreds of millions of people from it. And it's like, you realize if you just evacuated Earth, all of this could be over. Like, you clearly have the technology to do a planet-wide evacuation. You could hold off the incursions while it happens. And the builder, this is the easiest way to make a truce with the builders. Just let Earth die. And it's like, we see all these other planets get blown up, and Cap is being his Cap self and ordering people around. And the whole time there's this little part of me that's like, or we could just blow up Earth. And it kind of like goes to show how much hubris comes with these Marvel heroes and the specialness of Earth. And I actually meant to say this in the last episode, but there's a great little anecdote. So Hickman had a question and answer at the beginning after everybody had only read Avengers 1. That was the only issue that was out. And it was on Comic Book Resources. And I asked a question, and my question was, are you going to address the fact that all this stuff happens to Earth? Like, it seems like Earth is so special. What makes it special? And he's like, oh, you don't even know. Like, he kind of was like, ding, 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 winner. And I didn't really understand that, what he was implying. But now reading it, I'm like, wow, Hickman went right to the sourse of my question with this whole run. Like, this whole run is about my question. He did it for me.
You're so giddy about this.
Well, it took me years to realize that I actually had like gotten it, the whole point of it in one question. And he couldn't tell me that at the time, but like, yeah, that's kind of the whole point of this whole run.
But the thing is, to your point though, Black Swan actually did mention in the previous, I think in the issue 6 or issue 5, like, you know, that the Illuminatis were telling her that all the different things that they can try out and things like that. And she said that, oh, your version have already done it tens and hundreds of times. And the fact that one of the dead Earth that Black Panther blows up, destroys, I think that because that's what they did. They evacuated that and that left it to die. So it's not like something that it's just that they haven't thought about it.
But it's like that those heroes on that Earth have absolved themselves. They're like, look, the universe could end, but we're not going to get involved in this problem. But this is what makes these characters interesting. So I already kind of spoke against them, that it's so much hubris. Why can't they just give up Earth? But the reason they're interesting is it's not just their Earth they're trying to save. They're trying to stop what's happening and save the whole universe. The characters that abandon their Earth basically said, like, whatever happens, happens. Like, eventually the universe might end. We don't know, because once our Earth is destroyed, we lose access to being able to deal with this problem. And they were okay with that. And that's a much shorter term choice. Even if it's, they've kept their universe alive for hours, days, weeks, months, years, they ultimately have dealt themselves out of the game. Whereas our Illuminati want to stay in the game. So it's a really, like, yes, our Earth's heroes have so much attitude about saving Earth, but at the same time, they care more than the people who abandoned their Earth and dumped themselves out of this problem.
Right. Speaking of attitude, there is a lot of that in this run.
Yeah, there's attitude from Thanos. There's attitude from his Black Order. There's attitude from all of the generals of all the other species. There's just a lot of
like. Yeah, there's attitude from Namor, there's attitude from Black Bolt, like, everyone is like, oh my god. Yeah, but the thing is, like, one thing I was kind of, my takeaway from that, all these earth-shattering things and everything is happening. But I think, like, what really kind of stuck with me, that Marvel's 3 kings, all 3 of them loses their kingdom at the end of it. Like, the Black Bolt loses it and he starts the Terrigenesis, which is, I think, the start from inhumanity. Yes, and that's the thing. To me, I'm like, I don't care. Like, I don't know if, I have mentioned it before, but Miss Marvel is me. I'm Miss Marvel. Like, I mean, that's like, that's...
You have a personal connection.
Like, I have a personal connection because she is my Spider-Man, because she is like a Pakistani American individual, like a Muslim superhero who becomes a superhero after getting Terrigenesis. And she picks up the name of Miss Marvel, her hero, based on Captain Marvel, and it's exactly something I would do. I would be
At what point in the story did you realize that this was actually kind of the origin story of how we got Miss Marvel? Like, did you know that going in?
Yeah, I knew as soon as they said Terrigenesis because I memorized everything of Miss Marvel. Like, I read the first two oversized hardcover like three times now, 3.5 times. And yeah, so as soon as the word Terrigenesis was said and Maximus, there was like this bomb that they were putting it together, and then that this is gonna happen. I'm like, oh my god, this is it. This is the origin of my superhero. I was just like doing this the whole time. Forget everything else that was going on. I was just so excited about that.
I felt similarly in that, like, the Terrigenesis, I think when you first read the story without knowing what's going to happen afterwards in Marvel, and just to catch people up who don't understand it. So the Inhumans are made inhuman in their adolescence by exposure to these Terrigen crystals and the vapors of these crystals, and that's what triggers their development of powers, as opposed to mutants who just develop powers on their own. And so as one of the results of the story, the Terrigen is kind of released all around the world in this kind of last-minute Hail Mary play by Black Bolt to preserve his race, but also to kind of thwart Thanos' intention of destroying their city. But knowing what comes after this, that it births this whole Inhumans as a line of comic books, and that it gives us Miss Marvel, and then ultimately also Moon Girl, and a number of other characters that are like pretty beloved characters now in the Marvel universe, I couldn't help but look at this whole story as an act of creation. It's kind of like it's Melio flinging an Argent bomb. Like, even though it's a minor plot point in this story, and I didn't understand when I first read it how important it was, in the greater scope of Marvel, it's really actually a big deal. Hickman is kickstarting a whole new race of heroes in the Marvel universe.
And that's to me, I don't know whether I'm gonna have grandkids, but if I do, and I'm gonna give them Miss Marvel, and I'm gonna also give them my Infinity oversized hardcover with it. I'm like, you want to know where Miss Marvel came from? Start here.
Yeah,
so to me, this is pretty much one of those, the same way people look at, back in Golden Age superhero comics. This is my Golden Age superhero comics.
Well, and I think that's something that
my
I really
origin
got
story
this time around is I think Hickman would have taken us there regardless, because maybe later this year we'll read his Fantastic Four run, which is one of the great runs of modern comic books.
Right.
That had Black Bolt in it. It had this conflict with the Inhumans, and I have to think that Hickman was going to get us there one way or another, whether the Marvel marketing machine needed Inhumans, whether he was writing Infinity. I do think that he had in mind, and we couldn't know unless we asked him, this potential future for the Inhumans, because he clearly really cares about that group of characters based on the fact that he brought Black Bolt late in the game into his run of Fantastic Four. So it has a sort of inevitability to me. Like, it feels like not only is it important, and not only is it like the golden age of this new hero, Miss Marvel, but it also is something that the Marvel universe needed in order to make this faction real and counterbalance mutants, which I have some negative feelings about, but ultimately I think it's probably for the best in the long run, because it adds to the diversity of stories that you can tell in Marvel.
Right, but thing is, at the same time, though, this is my one of my first interaction with Black Bolt or Inhuman, and also Namor to a certain degree. But I don't understand why there is the comparison between Inhuman and X-Men, because I understand they both have superpower, but they are so vastly different in terms of their lore or their history or their group that they are.
Well, that's certainly something that we can get into in a whole other discussion, but in
short,
I think it's that kind of development of powers in adolescence, which kind of makes them a little bit parallel. And also that it's kind of like hidden by birth, right? You don't know if you're a mutant until you get your powers. You don't know if you're an Inhuman in the general populace unless you get affected by Terrigenesis. And so there's that. But then there's also this grander scheme of, like, the Marvel Cinematic Universe didn't have access to the X-Men. How could we have X-Men style characters? So, like, there's levels. But I think narratively, you're right, because the Inhumans are much more about these, like, royal rulers and kings and cities, and the mutants are much more distributed, kind of everyman sort of characters. So from that perspective, they're really not all that similar.
Right. And so going back to the kings fighting with each other, the second one is between Namor and T'Challa. And, if you've been following us,
like, wow.
To me, I think the fact that I felt a bigger impact, because we recently completed Black Panther read for Christopher Priest, and over there was a initial, I feel, the seed of their animosity was sown over there, and to see that kind of come to this, because I know that in X-Men versus Avengers there's like this whole thing that happened with the flooding of Wakanda and stuff. That's where it all began. But the way that Namor was undercut by T'Challa was like, I was reminded of Priest Black Panther. Like, the T'Challa in Priest Run, I was reminded of him,
Well,
that how he was just undercut.
This has got some great moments where not only are they kind of playing against each other, because, so the history here is that, as Freya said, this great tide of water, floods and Wakanda and kills a lot of people in Avengers versus X-Men, although there's kind of this technicality of like, well, was the city beaten or was it a natural disaster? So they're still trying to like say, Wakanda is this undefeated, unbeaten city. But now Black Panther, wants to kill Namor, but then they've got to cooperate on the Illuminati. But there's this extra layer of Shuri, who's technically the queen right now, and Shuri doesn't know all the things that are happening in the Illuminati. You could make the argument that maybe Shuri should be in the Illuminati rather than T'Challa, and that would certainly be a very interesting outcome. But part of it is like she doesn't know that he's got to kind of have this cooperation with for Namor. So Namor, out of the spirit of that cooperation, kind of sues for peace. And Shuri is like, oh, no, I don't think so. And so she says she's going to accept it. And she basically totally decimates down to a person the kingdom of Atlantis. Yeah.
Right. And it was brutal because, you don't usually see this, like, especially in comic book, like Big Two, it's like, oh, no, everything's going to be fine at the end. But no, there's no coming back from this. Like, it was like completely destroyed. And the thing is, the way T'Challa breaks the news to Namor, that to me, I was like, oh, gasp.
Well, Namor has so many interesting moments in here, and one that will always stick with me, where they're all like kind of bickering in the Illuminati, and Namor's like, okay, well, while you're all bickering, my kingdom has been destroyed, but sure, let's go solve problems for Black Bolt. Yeah, like whatever. And it's like, as much as Namor kind of is made out to be this asshole a lot of the time, because that's his character, you get to see like how he can be altruistic, and he does care about the world, because he would rather be doing anything but this Illuminati stuff. But such is the weight of the crown on the head of the king that sometimes you've got to do things and forget about what's going on inside of your own kingdom. And we get Black Panther doing that too, because he never comes to Shuri's defense. And Wakanda, he has to stay in the necropolis to defend these bombs that could, each one of them could detonate a world. And they've got like 24 of them. And Shuri at the end is like, how dare you not defend your own city? And T'Challa can't tell him the why of it. All he can tell her is that Namor is involved. And it's just like such a heavy toll taken on the both of them as characters. It's such a heavy weight.
Yeah, and that interaction between Namor and T'Challa at the end was like, I was like, oh, like, there was like so many moments. But by the time I thought that I was done gasping, but that was like one of the last things that happened in this book, and I was still kind of shocked and wowed by it. And that to me was like, this is one of the greatest run ever.
And it really is, it's interesting because I feel like none of these Illuminati members are really left the same. And that plays out into all different Marvel that comes after Secret Wars. Like, none of them ever can get back to where they were. And they're all changed characters. Tony Stark, even Reed Richards, who's taken off the table entirely in all different Marvel. Because I feel like Hickman kind of writes the culmination of all of their morality and their moral choices. And it takes a heavy toll. So now I want to zoom out from we've been talking about basically what's happening in New Avengers, because anytime we're talking about Namor and T'Challa and the Illuminati, this is a New Avengers plot. And I want to zoom all the way out to the Universal plot, and then we'll come back kind of into the middle ground of what's going on with Thanos. So the builders kind of force all of these universe-wide kingdoms to come together and defend against them. And there's the first big blowout where the Avengers really think that they've set this great trap. It's one of these like classic sci-fi moments. They're waiting, and then it gets exposed, and they attack the builders, and they just get the floor gets wiped. Like the fleet is destroyed. The Avengers are split up. Captain Marvel's team ultimately gets captured in a story that's one of the few true crossover moments in this. It all plays out in Avengers Assemble and Captain Marvel in a crossover story that we don't see here. That's the only thing that's not in this Infinity book, is that story. I mean, there's other tie-ins, but none of them are as critical to understanding what's happening as like what happens to Captain Marvel after that fight. But I think at that point, I'm kind of like, how are they going to bounce back from this? It's going to take some Deus Ex Machina, because how could you possibly get back against a superior force? But it's a credit to Hickman in that it's not a Deus Ex Machina. We get to see them fight back like inch by inch as the story continues.
Right. And because nothing is over like in a page. Nothing is over like, you think that, oh, it's going to be over. There's like Captain America saying, oh, we surrender. But then you realize that, oh, wasn't the plan. But then there was another plan. But at no point that you felt like it was over like that. They actually had to fight for it. And it was like because the builders were a worthy foe for them.
Yeah, and I have this moment in a lot of comic stories where I don't like that rubber band back and forth of a story. It reminds me of being like a little kid and playing with your toys and like not wanting to finish playing and being like, but then something else happens and then your Thundercats come over and it really like pisses me off after a while because it doesn't have weight. Like I'm somebody who really cares about narrative stakes and it starts to feel weightless when everybody's constantly bouncing back from everything. And I don't have that feeling in this story. I feel like it's a linear progression where we have to see Cap innovate bigger and bigger, and it's fun to see Cap on this universe-wide scale ultimately taking charge of the survival of the entire universe. I don't feel like we've seen Cap at this scale, at this scope since like Galactic Storm. And it's fun to see Captain America with that kind of responsibility. I think it's going to be mirrored by what we see in the Infinity War movie. And so I think it's really fun to read it here because there's no other time we've seen Captain America this much in charge of universe-wide stakes, I don't think.
So I don't know whether I mentioned this to you, Peter, before, but I really love Captain America. Like, I don't know if I ever said it to you.
You totally pucked me there. I'm like, what are you going to tell me?
Well, like, I don't know, maybe this is the first time I'm mentioning it, but my God, how awesome Captain America was in this. Like,
and you never feel like it's like in over his head. Like it never feels like something that's not realistic for the character. It's completely realistic for the character.
Yeah, and the thing is, like, because I actually read Rick Remender's Captain America run to it, and I feel like this is the Captain America from that run, and it's supposed to be, but the thing is, like, it just like I was flummoxed, like I was actually floored that and it felt perfectly normal. It felt perfectly natural that he's being the strategist, and then driving the war, like not just being there on the field, but also at the driving the forces, and then also this like these aliens who were like, oh, humans, and he's like putting them in their places. Like it was just like everything about this was just awesome.
And you tease this for a second, but they bounce back from this one defeat. He manages to get a team in the back door and free Captain Marvel's team, which has the interesting side effect of reuniting all of the other Ex Nihilios with our Ex Nihilo, but also with Abyss. And we find out that there's no other Abysses. Yeah. And she represents kind of like the entropy and the chaos of life. And you realize that the builders are not as altruistic as they're being made out, because if they were, why would they have restricted the Abysses? The whole point is the Aleph is supposed to give birth to this force of life and this force of chaos. And so are the builders being true to their purpose if they've taken away the force of chaos, which is a much bigger question than Infinity. It's a question for this bigger run of like, are the builders really all that they're claiming to be?
Right, and the thing is, like, wasn't it mentioned that the Abysses just died off because they didn't have anything to do? Like, as if they had,
like, an infection or something.
Right.
They withered on the vine.
Right. Like, they just withered off. And we talked about it in our last week's episode that our Ex Nihilo, we're going to call him our Ex Nihilo, is different than the others because of this, because he has chaos, because he has with his sister by his side, he is a little bit more creative and a little bit different than the other Ex Nihilos who are a bit more hive-minded.
And that's such an interesting point. Maybe he's not different. Maybe it's the other ones that are different. Maybe this is what normal is supposed to be because he has an abyss. I never really thought about it that way, but that's a really good point. Like he's the normal one. All the other ones are weird because they've been corrupted.
Right, and I actually looked at it that's how they're supposed to be, but because they get to grow up, he became different. He's But I don't know. But yeah, that's also a good point. That it's like if they all had abysses, would they be like this Ex Nihilo?
Right. So from this, we get the builders take the Kree homeworld. which it feels like bad things always happen to these poor Kree.
Right.
And Ronan is kind of reduced to being this.
Like I said, I don't know much about Marvel Cosmic, but I know the Krees are not in a good shape.
No, they get their butt kicked pretty much every time. And Ronan is like this manservant to the Builder and to the Kree Supreme Intelligence, who, to its credit, always plays probabilities. Like, the probability is we can't win. But Cap, it like doesn't care about your damn probability. Cap is gonna find a way, right?
No,
if it's a 99% chance of that's the Captain America way.
Right.
And gives us one of the coolest comic book moments I can think of by sending. So let's just stop before you know what I'm going to say.
My God.
So if you had to pick any Avenger, any Earth hero to send as your negotiator with these builders, without knowing who he chooses, who would you choose?
I don't know anymore. I would probably send no, but to be honest, I would send Cap. Like,
right, you wouldn't send Cap himself. Like,
right.
It kind of staggers belief that they don't actually send Cap until you realize what the plan is.
Right, I would send Cap or T'Challa. Like, that's who I would go.
Well,
that's who I would go with.
It feels like almost all the ones that we would normally send are in the Illuminati, and they're not there, right? Like, you would send Reed, you would send T'Challa, you would send Tony, and they're not available.
Right. So the thing is, like, there's like, it was a build-up moment. It's like, it's revealed kind of moment, and everyone, I was like, wait, who is this? Who is this that he sent? Because in the background you hear that him talking about, like, I sent like a negotiator,
and then Captain Marvel would get sent. Like, you're thinking, like, who's the next one in charge?
Right. And sorry, it's not him, but it's like the builders, or one of the builders general was saying that, the humans send someone to negotiate, and then the builders like, there's no negotiation, la la da di da, and then it's revealed, and who this person is?
It's Thor. And when you see him walk off the ship, I don't know about you, but when I saw Thor walk off the ship, I had this moment of like, well, this isn't going to go well.
I was
because
like,
Thor, not the greatest at controlling his temper, not the greatest at negotiation. So, like, on one hand, you're like, well, clearly there's some other plan here. But on the other hand, I just had this moment of like, oh, this is not going to end happily.
Yeah, and then I actually thought the exact same thing. I'm like, okay, so what? And so I don't know. I've read, like, I haven't read Marvel Now Thor yet. But the thing is, like, I have read Simonson's Thor, and obviously the MCU or whatever. I always thought Thor to be a little bit dim-witted, like, a little bit not there.
He's a big blonde, hunky, Hemsworth kind of hero.
Yeah, he's a bit of a Hemsworth. Let's say that. Let's make that a word.
Yeah,
but the thing is, like, I never in my life thought that, he will be a good negotiator. So I don't know what the hell Cap was thinking. But
except we do know what Cap was thinking. So, he comes onto the scene. Ronan makes him give away Mjolnir, which immediately is not going to go well for them in the long term. And
not take the hammer away.
No. And then the builder, like, backhands Thor, like Batman backhanding Robin, And it's and you're like, this is just, you are not, he is mad, and you are not going to like what happens. And so the builder's giving his big monologue. Thor flings Mjolnir. It goes through the whole universe that they're in. It goes around the sun, gets superheated, and right when the builder's like about to deliver the end of his diatribe, Mjolnir just guts him. And it's just like the coolest moment. It's just so cool, and it looks amazing.
Oh my God! And the thing is, like, I was like, wait, what just happened? Like, I did not even see that. Like, it was just like the whole thing of it was that was just awesome. And the thing is, like, you also see that intercut with, like, others, like, the let's just call them, like, the good side kind of
reading with bated breath.
Yeah, like, what intent. And then the thing is, like, Cap is just looking there and looking cool as, like, it's like, oh, it's gonna work out. I'll come up with a plan. Like, he was looking at, and then Captain Marvel's there, and everyone's there, and then all of these things happening. So it's just the intercut. It's just such a movie moment. I love that thing. I talk about, like, movie moments a lot, like, especially in comics, like, when the paneling is done in a way that it makes you feel like it's like a moving pictures. Like, I just loved it.
Yeah, and I mean, I hope we get a moment like that in Infinity War, because it's such a good Thor moment.
If that's the way, like, oh my God, yes, let's have it. Come on, let's decree it.
So what I really find interesting is what characters get the focus in this Infinity story, as we're kind of wrapping up talking about the Universal story and then making our way back to Earth. Cap, huge focus. Fun little moments with Smasher, Cannonball, and Sunspot as kind of the young team, the farm squad. Black Widow gets some really cool moments, even though she's like this normal human, where like she's kind of Cap's left hand, where she can kind of go in and do the bad deeds. And you know, of course now Thor, but Captain Marvel comes out of this looking pretty cool, I think. You have to think that Captain Marvel just became Captain Marvel right before Marvel Now, and she's only like 15 issues into her series. So this development of Carol Danvers getting out of the swimsuit and being Captain Marvel is really kind of new. And it's only about a year and a half old. And I think Hickman writes some of her best moments here, where she's like with Cap at his side and she's his most trusted advisor. She's like leading the mission. She's setting the strategy. And I think that even though Kelly Sue DeConnick writes her so brilliantly in her series, I think a lot of the scope of like, wow, Carol's like really in charge now, comes from the elevation of Hickman here. And also just the Lionel Francis Yu drawing the ever living hell out of her in the Avengers run. I mean, she looks really cool here.
Right. And the thing is, like, so I know a little bit about Captain Marvel, and I actually got the Kelly Sue DeConnick's run over here. Like, you know, I haven't read that yet, but to me, the most, like, the part that I was like, I need to read more about her, because it was like the first, I think it's the second issue of Avengers, when, you know, they were recruiting all these people, and it was her and Jessica, Spider-Woman.
Jessica Drew,
you know,
yeah.
Jessica Drew, like, you know, they're just sitting together, and then, you know, they're like, you know, they're Captain, and then Steve Rogers and our Tony Stark are kind of like, you know, they're in a dinner settings and stuff like that. But what really kind of stuck with me, like, they were just kind of teasing each other, and the stuck with me is like, you know, Captain just looks at her and tells her like, oh, what do you say, soldier? And she's like, you know that I'm in. Like, it just like that interaction, that the fact that she's also a soldier, like, you know, and then like Captain acknowledging her like that, like the two captains acknowledging her like that. I thought that was like, I was like, I need to read more about her. And the thing is, like, obviously in Infinity, she also has like a better, like, you know, such a, like a cooler moments. Like, I'm just waiting to finish this run so I can start that.
Yeah, and I think that, again, talking about things I hope to see echoes in the Marvel Universe, so much of Carol's history as a character is about, she has self-defeating tendencies. And I mean, there's so many tropes that she gets saddled with again and again, where she like loses her powers. That's a trope we get a lot with her. There's some kind of evil duplicate of her, a person who's stolen her powers. That's a trope we get. Like, there's just a lot of stories that, even though she's got a relatively tidy, small, you know, history where she's only got about 130 issues solo as a character, that we just get these themes again and again and again. And I feel like this is one of the few times that we've gotten the scope of her as this commander. And I loved it. And not only because I like that character and I've liked her for, you know, almost 30 years now, but because I just felt like it felt right. Like you said, like, she's a soldier above all else. You know, you could almost compare her to a Green Lantern. And as much as we talk crap on Hal Jordan, like, he always puts this fighter pilot part of himself above everything else. And he lets that drive everything that he does. And I think that's who Carol Danvers is. She's Marvel's Hal Jordan, which maybe means you have to hate her a little bit. But I really think that comes out in this run.
Okay, yeah, I don't know. I was actually kind of thinking a little bit more like a Batwoman, maybe because we just read it, and, you know, they kind of have a similar tendency.
That's definitely another analog, though.
Right. You know, because the thing is, like, we just read Detective Comics and the Batwoman run, so I was kind of seeing a little bit of her in that too, because, you know, I was like, you know, but I don't know. I had to read her run before I can comment more. But it's just something that it's kind of like I said, like, out of like all the characters over here, Namor, Black Bolt, and Captain Marvel are the three that I'm really looking forward to reading.
Yeah, I'm really stuck out, I think, in this particular story. So now let's wrap the space arc and then move back to Earth. So Captain America and company managed to turn the tide slowly but surely on these builders. And ultimately, it involves some really questionable choices. They bring Annihilus back and his whole annihilation wave, which is like, at that moment. I'm like, oh my God. And you think it's going to go so badly, and it does go badly, but not as badly as it could have, knowing what happened in things like Annihilation Conquest. And eventually they managed to rout the builders through a series of just amazing space. I mean, I complain a lot about how none of the Marvel space sagas ever feel big. It always like feels way too small. This is as big as it gets. Like this feels bigger than any sci-fi movie I've ever seen. It's so huge.
The only thing that was missing was Galactus showing up at some point, because I was really hoping for, because he just always shows up for a second and then goes away, and I was like, that's kind of like, that's where
that's how big it is. It feels, I think like The Last Jedi is one of the few movies I can think of that like just has as big space action as then Last Jedi really is actually quite constrained in the action that's happening, because it's just one specific chase, but it actually is an interesting analog to this, because it's kind of like the builders can only move so fast, which is kind of a plot point in Last Jedi too, but let's not get totally off track. So the builders are routed for the time being, which lets us refocus what's happening on Earth. So Thanos brought to Earth the Black Order, which are these 5 newly invented, newly designed characters for this, and they're his generals. And each one of them is like the baddest of the bad. We've got the toughest of the tough, the most warrior, the worst killer, the worst psychic, and they're kind of dispersed on Earth to try to get to the bottom of what is going on, where is this child, what's been going on with the Infinity Stones, because Thanos always cares about that. And one of the interesting things that happens is Doctor Strange just gets the whammy put on him by the psychic one.
I know.
And just totally becomes subservient to him without even realizing, which it's scary. There's like a horror element to it.
Right, and the thing is, my exposure to Doctor Strange in the Marvel universe is not that extensive. But the thing is, I always thought to him as like infallible, that nothing can get to him. By the fact that Black Order just so easily, one of the members of the Black Order so easily took over him, Ebony Maw, I think his name.
Yeah.
Why am I remembering this thing? This is amazing.
And they have cool names, but yeah,
Right, Ebony Maw, he's like the most, the least, the one you would least suspect, kind of goes in and just takes over like that. And to me, I was like, ew, these people are not to be meddled with.
And I think that the Thanos story really goes deep into who the Illuminati are in the New Avengers. They're not incorruptible. And this is important why Cap is not there. We see each of them get broken. Like you've talked about the 3 kings being broken because they get their kingdoms taken away. But we get the fundamentally broken Doctor Strange here, who loses control of his own self-determination, which is like the biggest thing you could take away from him. So Thanos, without even meaning to, this is not his reason to be in this plot, but he really breaks the Illuminati. He doesn't really break Beast as much, although Beast is kind of broken in his own way in the X-Men at this point. And we still don't really see the true ramifications of all the decisions that they have to make on Tony and on Reed. That will come later. But of the 6, we've got 4 of them that are just shattered as a result of Thanos's interventions here. One of his Black Order gets to Atlantis just after it's been shattered, and we have this moment of Namor, being like, what more could you possibly take from me? And it turns out that he sees a way to finally humble Wakanda, which is that he just lies and says that the last Infinity Stone is in Wakanda. And he winds up sending the full force of Thanos' forces at Wakanda after they already turned back Black Dwarf. Shuri personally turns back Black Dwarf in a pretty epic battle, but now they've got to fight off all of Thanos' forces altogether.
Right. And it was like, I think that was the kind of the point of it, to say that, that Illuminati themselves are not as infallible as they thought they were. They were so focused on one thing that they forgot to be a team, or they forgot to kind of deal with their own issues. And there's all these layers and layers of backstabbing, their own personal things that they weren't dealing with anymore. And Thanos's Black Order came to put them in their place.
And so not only does Wakanda fall to the Black Order, not only does the Black Order briefly take over the necropolis and so take control of all of the bombs, but also they do find Thanos' son, and as a result of the Terrigenesis bomb, he manifests his inhuman powers, which is he could heal or he could kill, and he he proves to be so powerful that he wipes out this whole city, and just by virtue of being his skin being exposed. And Ebony Maw, to the rescue, puts him in this suit, but he also gets in his ear about, like, think of how powerful you are. Is Thanos this powerful? You're the next generation of this power. And it leads us up to this huge finale which it feels like so small and personal for a finale given the scope of the story, but the Avengers are back from space, the Illuminati are there, everybody converges on Thanos, and they're about to be beaten. Thor is losing to Thanos. Captain Marvel is knocked out by Proxima Midnight. And it's ultimately Thane who has to defeat Thanos here.
Right. And I think it was like a little bit poetic as well, that, it was like all this time Thanos was out there trying to trying to kill this, like his last child, but it was actually him who was, took him out. But I don't know whether his Thanos's quest to kill his children is because of some sorcery that says that his children is going to be the end of him, or he just likes to do that. I don't know.
A little column A, a little column B. I don't know.
Sure. Yeah, you can't quite say how the madness works.
So now let's, we've been zooming back in. We got to the Thanos fight. We already talked about the Inhumans, but we end with an incursion. Like, after all this happening, the Illuminati still has to be on call whenever their hand lights up with the incursion warning.
Right.
And in this example, they discover builders. And Iron Man understands how scary that is because he's been getting updates from Captain America in space. So he's like, oh my gosh, builders. But these builders have a very different wager for the Illuminati. They're like, we already know what you're doing in your universe. We want to show you how easy it is for us to blow up a world. You've got to think bigger if you intend to be effective here. And so this is like almost like a benevolent version of the builders. And they basically just hold the Illuminati in stasis and watch them just blow up this Earth, and give them more time to figure out what they're going to do on our Earth Prime.
The interaction between Thanos and Black Swan, I love it. What was that? Because I was like, okay, because I don't know if that's going to be explored later on or explained later on, because Thanos is like, just looks at her, is like, oh, are you going to let me go? And he's like, I think not. And then she responds the same thing at the very end. So I don't know what's like. I mean, give me a hint. Not twice. If it's gonna come back later.
Oh, all right. It's definitely gonna come back later.
Okay.
Not the last interaction you will see between Black Swan and Thanos, but to me at the time, it hinted even more of like, does Thanos know who she is? Like that's.
I thought the same thing.
It really felt like.
And
was it just kind of like game recognizing game, or was it like he specifically has knowledge of her and he's like, no, thank you.
Yeah, but the thing is, I actually for a second I thought that she is Death. Like for a second I thought, because I know that Thanos' obsession with death and all that. So I was like, I thought that that's what that's what it's kind of heading towards, but it wasn't. But anyway, but yeah, that was pretty hilarious though. Like in this like crazy things that are going on, it's like, I think not, and then he just goes away.
And you have to think like, whose help is Thanos going to turn down? Like he's got so much ego and he's got so much power. Like who would he not let free from a jail cell if he thought it could help him? So like that lends a lot more ominous, scary quality to Black Swan.
Right, especially the enemy of my enemy is my friend, But the thing is, like, well, Black Swan already has said, like, she can just kind of come in and out anytime, but she just chooses not to. So it's kind of like, I was like, what's that about? But anyway, it's one of those things that kind of
I will say that this next run we're going to read, the Avengers stories in the next run, kind of really take a break from all this builders stuff. The new Avengers stories do not. They get real heavy, real fast, and you need to be paying attention to this Doctor Strange stuff. You need to be paying attention to Black Swan, and you need to be paying attention to Thanos, because that is, I mean, all of the stuff in New Avengers becomes the whole point of all of this run in the long term. But we're going to get a lot of material relating to those characters in this next little sequence. So we said at the end of the last episode, barely able to contain our excitement, that this is Marvel's best event, and it might be like one of the best comic events of all time. Now that we can talk full spoilers about it, why do you say that it's one of the best comic events of all time?
Well, so the way I kind of look at it, like, I really enjoy when all the superheroes comes together with this like really like this something that is like beyond normal human capacity. Like I don't necessarily care for like they're fighting each other like in Civil War,
Yeah,
or
I'm
like
so over it. I'm done.
yeah, or like even like I think Planet Hulk was kind of like, or in World War Hulk was kind of like this way too, because there's this one thing that no one can get against, and kind of our like everything is coming to an end kind of thing. So I really enjoy that, and for me to have that kind of that kind of story, it's always a win for me. So that's one of the reasons. And because I haven't read a lot of these, Annihilation was kind of like that, but I haven't actually completed that. So it's always gonna be like what like anytime I come across this, I will say that these are one of the best. Like I really enjoy this kind of like books where it's like this like so many things happening at the same time, but it's like heroes are kind of working towards it and kind of going to win, and it's not just over in a page. Like have this like moments like the one with the Thor, or like Captain America being just like a a cool strategist, and all these other kings losing kingdoms and things like that. It's just like everything about it was just amazing.
And for me, that really shows in the fact that this book that we read is 22 issues by Jonathan Hickman that came out in like a 7-month period.
Right.
Well, the Avengers Prelude issues came out a little bit before that, but so let's say 9 months. But this is more than just double shipping. He's doing almost 3 comic books a month, and they fit in together perfectly. We talked a little bit about how in the collection you can't tell where you are because all there are these white title pages. They don't have any of the covers. They don't say when an issue starts and ends. And the artwork, it's all colored by almost all by Justin Posner, who's amazing. And so it all has this uniform look, and even some of the specific artwork, like I think the Earth art from Dustin Weaver in Infinity looks so close to Mike Deodato's Earth art that it's hard to even tell where you are.
Right.
And still, Hickman manages to give you little recap pages that help you know that you've shifted from one title to another, so that like you kind of can be like, okay, right, that's where we are. But it's an amazing feat. This is one story by one person. It's crazy. And I think that's what makes it so good. The only time that we've really seen anything of this scope similar to this is like, I guess, Secret Invasion. Like maybe the Secret Invasion omnibus that's coming up is going to prove how amazing Bendis was at writing that. But Bendis focused so much on like the backstory of Secret Invasion that it wasn't like 22 issues of just breath caught in your throat drama the way that this is. It's hard to think of anything else that has a similar scope. I really think you were right in terms of like Final Crisis and Infinite Crisis, probably are the only 2 things that I can think of that come as close to being this epic. And I don't think it's, again, I know nowhere in there that I say because it's in space. I think things can happen on Earth that are a story that's this big, but it's just Hickman having all of the toys in the toolbox. He gets to use the X-Men, the Fantastic Four, the Avengers, Black Panther, name more, the Guardians of the Galaxy show up. Like he's allowed to do whatever he wants. And it's huge, and it's hard to think of anything getting this close to being this much of a statement from a single author, who then goes on to, he wrote 20 issues before we even got to this point, and he goes on to write another 30 or 40 issues after this point in this story. It's an epic.
Yeah, and from what I heard, the quality never dips. So that's the. Oh, okay. Okay.
We'll see.
But the thing is, that's to me is like is quite an achievement. But at the same time, like we talked about it last week as well, is that the lyrical aspect of it, like the way he kind of presents it, and the way the story, it hits you in the feels in a way, in some at some points. So
yeah, I think that some stories like this has a tendency when they're like 1 million people died, 1 billion people died, but it's just there to make you feel like there's stakes. But he finds these moments to make you care. Like he says that, and then he follows the refugees. He says that, and you see Thor with a little kid in his arms. Like Hickman will give you these moments of like, and then 1 million people died. But then he like hits you with the real feeling after he gives you the number, which I think is part of what makes Hickman such a good writer. And his, as you said, it's easy to get so caught up in his concepts and how epic it is and whatever, and his ideas, to forget that his prose is strong.
Right. And the thing is, like, especially that one page, I'm trying to look for it. It's that, when they say that at the end of the day, we were Avengers, like, it just, like, and then they all come together for the first time. Like, it's just have this moments that kind of sticks with you, and it just makes it even better.
Yeah. So I mean, we clearly love this. I loved it so much more this time on reread. I think I talked a lot about how overwhelming it was to read month to month or even trade to trade. I think that this benefits from this massive read. If you like omnibuses, you absolutely should buy the Hickman Avengers Volume 1 and Volume 2 is out pretty shortly. This reads amazingly all in one go, and it's infinitely rereadable because there's just so many little things happening so much, and it makes me really regret that I sold my Fantastic Four Hickman omnibuses because that run is just as good. But luckily, I have it in other formats because I'm like a squirrel and I have everything.
Oh, I got the Hickman of Fantastic Four, and I'm after reading this, I'm now slowly becoming a Hickman fan. That I'm probably going to read his Secret Warriors and his Fantastic Four back to back.
Wow. Okay, well, maybe that could be something we do later this year. Who knows? So for next time, if you want to see what the reading assignment is, check out the comments. We have several weeks more of this. We have to read everything that takes us between Infinity and Time Runs Out for next week. Then the week after that, we're going to read Time Runs Out, which is its own huge epic. And then finally, we're going to get to read Secret Wars as the culmination of all of this. So a lot more Hickman Avengers to come in the coming weeks. Any final thoughts on Infinity from you, Faria?
It was great. I'm just looking forward to the next part of it.
All right. Well, that is it for us today on Avengers Book Club. Tune in next week as we read that material that gets us from the end of Infinity to Times Are Out. Actually, maybe one more thing to say. So this other comic called Avengers World, and Avengers World starts to carry the more kind of personal stories and earthbound stories of the Avengers outside of the main title because the main title isn't double shipping anymore. It is not required reading for next week. I will, in the comment below this video, show the reading order if you choose to read Avengers World. I think Free and I are both going to try to read it, but if we talk about it, we're going to do it in a separate chunk. So it's not going to interrupt your main episode consumption if you choose not to read it, but it's entirely optional, and it's like 20 more issues to read. So if the reading is a tall order, don't worry about it. But we are going to attempt to read it and give you a second extra bonus episode about it for next week.
I'm excited.
All right. And that's really it. This has been Crushing Comics Book Club with Peter and Faria. Take care.
Bye, everyone.